Hello and welcome into a brand new destination of MLS Chit Chat. Jessica Charman, Jason Longshore. This is MLS Six Pack, a brainchild of Jason and I, as we always love to talk MLS. And Jason, delighted to kickstart this one after a crazy week of action and a busy week of action ahead.
Yeah, the summer of soccer is a real thing, and MLS is going to be a huge, huge part of it. It's a little crazy at the moment with players away on international duty. We're watching the Euros, we're watching Copa America. We've also got a busy MLS calendar, so this will be a good spot for folks out there to keep up with kind of the six big talking points each week of what's going on around the league, on and off the field.
Listen, it's not always easy to pick those six. So people at Jess Talks Footy, at Longshoe, if you have six that you want us to talk about, tweet us and we will see what we can find. Jason, before we get into MLS, how much of the Euros have you been watching and what have you been your hot takes so far?
I've been watching a decent bit. Hot takes. It's honestly not a hot take because I did not expect much out of Belgium, and I think we saw that. I expected more out of England, and you can say whatever you want in response to that. I think Spain was the most impressive team that we've seen so far. Scotland was really disappointing. I didn't expect them to give Germany like a massive tough time, but I expected more of a fight, and they can get out of that group, but not if they play in the way that they did. Spain right now is the best team that we've seen on the field.
Yeah, they moved the ball beautifully as expected. Listen, Jason and I will also have Copa America action. So we're going to be talking a lot of soccer this summer, but back to MLS. Now we've got to start with Inter Miami, and that's an Inter Miami without Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Matia Rojas, all on Copa America duty. But they were somehow able to grind out a result. Not only grind out a result, but to concede a goal, as they've done so often this season, 13th time of the season where they've conceded the first goal. But with 9 players, Jason, that's not one you see very often, being able to fight back from a deficit with -2 players on the pitch compared to your opponent.
It's one that I did not expect at all. I think everybody knows what we do on MLS match days typically, although sometimes the schedules get a little crazy and we might have a day off from Atlanta or Charlotte duty.
Excuse me, what is that?
Yeah, occasionally it happens to where we might be able to watch other games going on, but you're checking things on Twitter late in games. You're seeing things pop up on your timeline, and I saw that Miami was down to 9 players, and I did not then, when we're in our post game show and I'm getting the final score updates, I did not expect to see that Miami would come back with 9 and win that game, and in the manner that they did. It's a really crazy winning goal against a team with 9 for Miami to break and have a 2v1. They were missing 2 guys. How
much does that tell you? How much does that tell you about Philadelphia Union's desperation and the disappointing run that they're on, though, Jason? That they're 1-1 at home. They know they really need to go for 3 points. Do they get complacent with the fact that Inter Miami can still be dangerous on the counter by sending those bodies forward?
Yeah, 100%. I think they misplayed it a little bit too in terms of Jacob Glesnes and not handling that break well, but you can't put him in that situation. It can't break out to a 2v1. And look, it's a situation where you honestly like to have one extra player to defend than the opponent leaves up. But when it breaks, you've got to get back. And it felt like Philadelphia players were not putting that work in to get back and cover it. Look, on the Miami side, this is a team that's not going to pick up as many points when they're missing Messi and Suarez and Rojas and anybody else in this star-studded team. But this is a team that can still do some things, and they're all over the place. I mean, we saw it not that long ago when Atlanta went down there and won on a Wednesday night in Fort Lauderdale. This team is very hard to predict. One of the eye-opening things about this game to me is that they have conceded the first goal 13 times this season. With all of their wins, with all of their goals, with all of those stars, they've fallen behind on a regular basis. But the flip side of that is they've been able to turn those around and get 3 points in a lot of those games.
But is that sustainable is the big
No.
question mark that surrounds Inter Miami right now. They're looking for the supporter shield. I've always had question marks on if that's attainable for them based on how dependent they are in moments on other players. This result, though, shows that they do have strength in numbers when you look at their goal scorers. Obviously, former Atlanta United man Julian Gressel with, man, that was a pretty stunning strike from him. Wasn't something I expected to necessarily see for his first goal of the season. And then a second round draft pick in Leo Afonso getting that goal. So a few question marks may be answered for Inter Miami, but the sustainability, particularly when our next talking point, Cincinnati, comes into the play, is the question mark for this Inter Miami side when you look at the supporters shield potential.
Yeah, we'll see. I think supporter shield for Miami, it's going to depend on how many points they can pick up in these kind of situations where they're missing Messi, where they're missing Suarez. And they're going to have a lot of games where they're going to be missing those guys throughout the summer. So if they're going to be in that supporter shield race, they're going to have to win games in crazy ways like they did in Philly. And the team that they're going to be in that supporter shield race, our number 2 topic today, Cincinnati. They went out on the road, and Yuya Kubo with a second half hat trick, 3 goals between the 78th and 87th minutes. Kubo's a player who gets this win for Cincinnati 4-2 over San Jose, and Luciano Acosta, we'll talk about him in a second. But Yuya Kubo is a player that we saw come into the league as more of an attacking winger. Then I thought in the last year or two, he turned into one of the better two-way, box-to-box central midfielders in this league. And now this season, he's played a lot as a second striker, and he's putting the ball in the back of the net. Is he one of the most versatile players in Major League Soccer?
I think that's the word that you use, right? Versatility at its finest. And to have him coming off the bench and knowing he can be flexible in all of these different roles is what's so impressive. He always feels like a weapon depending on how he's going to be utilized, which I think also when you have that experience playing in other roles, it improves your ability when you're playing as that second striker because you understand what you want from your midfielders behind you. You understand how to play wide. You can be more fluid in the role that you can play. And I mean, we use the word super sub fairly often as a cliche in this sport, but this is the true definition of a super sub. I mean, you look at it, 3 goals scored between the 78th and the 87th minute. The 4th fastest hat trick in MLS history, by the way. The 4th, that's pretty surprising that there's 3 other hat tricks that have been quicker than that one. But if you're San Jose, you've got to think when you see this guy coming off the bench, it's going to be trouble. But you probably weren't thinking it was going to be quite as much of a devastating impact from Kubo.
No, I did not have Yuya Kubo coming in and turning this game on its head. Luciano Acosta is a big part of why, though. 3 assists on the night. You know, he is the reigning MVP. He's putting himself back into that conversation again, even with the year that Messi is having. You know, Cincinnati's won 8 times in their last 9. Acosta has either scored or assisted in 9 straight matches at one point this season. Is Lucho, I know Messi's going to get the votes. So let's leave what actually happens in the MVP race. But as independent analysts sitting here talking about this in the MLS Six Pack, is Luciano Acosta the deserving MVP winner in 2024 at this point in the season?
You know, I think what makes Acosta so pivotal is the difference he makes for this Cincinnati side. It's not to say that without Messi Inter Miami are successful. Obviously, Messi has a huge role. But I think when you look at the catalyst of a team, a metronome of a team, a heartbeat of the team, Lucho Acosta is even more of that to Cincinnati. You see it with the way he brings goals, the way he brings assists, the way he leads this side. And he has been a huge part of the revolution of this FC Cincinnati side that was terrible to begin with and now is again in a supporters shield race. And what makes Lucho Acosta and Messi so amazing is teams know what they're going to do. They can study film. They can try and man-mark these guys out of the game. They can try and put someone on them to body them out the game or foul them out the game. It doesn't work because their class is so difficult to be able to pin down. So for me, I think Lucho Acosta as the reigning MVP for those reasons as well, with what he single-handedly contributed to FC Cincinnati's results and supporter shield is up there. Do I think he's going to get it, as you pointed out? No, he doesn't. He's not Messi. So it's a tough one, but I think what he's done individually and even in this game, it is so amazing.
He might be even more valuable in 2024 than he was in 2023 for this team. That's the crazy thing about it. Now, some bad news on the Cincinnati front, and we got a little bit of an update today. Not much of one, but Pat Noonan, I think, made it clear in his media availability after training this morning that there's a possibility Matt Miazga is out for a little while. Crashed into the goalpost trying to block a play very late in this game, had to be stretchered off. Miles Robinson's away with the national team. We don't know how long Miazga will be out. How does Cincinnati cope with those two big absences?
It's tough. It's very tough because, as we know, FC Cincinnati prided itself on its defensive structure, and a huge part of that is that partnership between Miazga and Robinson. Look, Miazga's a divisive character. We know that he doesn't make too many friends, but he's the sort of player when he's playing on the team that you're rooting for as a former Reading FC fan and a Matt Miazga stan. I can understand that. He is the guy. Like, this injury defines what Matt Miazga does. He puts his body on his line. He's not afraid to get stuck in. And I think with Noonan's comments, you could tell that there's an element of real concern, not just individually based on Matt Miazga, but the fact that you could be playing down two starting centre backs for the remainder of at least this international break.
It's a problem. It's a problem for Cincinnati, and this has been a very good defensive team this year, adding Miles Robinson. But how long Miazga will be out will be a huge part of that supporter shield race with Cincinnati and Miami, and we might not get any answers until next week.
We may not. And that's the top of the table. Let's transition to lower down the Eastern Conference for point number 3. We're going to talk Chicago Fire, Jason, a team that was definitely struggling earlier on in the season, but they seem to have turned things around a tad bit. Turning it around might be a little generous, but they're definitely heading in the correct direction. And Frank Lopez drilled home that message after Saturday's 4-1 win at Toronto, saying that he feels like Chicago's in a very good stint right now. 2 wins, 2 draws is an impressive sign. But what I find most intriguing about this result is when we think Chicago Fire, we think Xherdan Shaqiri. And Shaqiri's out representing Switzerland in the Euro 2024 right now. Coincidence that Chicago Fire might be playing some of their best soccer without the designated player that has caused so much of a controversy for his lack of productiveness since arriving in Chicago?
Nope, not a coincidence. And it's not a knock on Shaqiri. I think there's been maybe a little bit too much individual criticism on Shaqiri. I don't think he's had enough pieces around him during the majority of his time in Chicago to be successful. And he's not a player who is going to take over games on his own. I think he needs guys around him to play with, and he hasn't had enough of that. Now, I think what his absence has done is something that has been evolving and probably should have happened to a larger degree last year. It's pushed Brian Gutierrez to the fore, and it's made it a little bit more of his team from a creative standpoint. But it's not just Gutierrez. I mean, in this game, you got goals from 4 different players. You're starting to get goals from Hugo Kuipers, which had been missing a little bit earlier in the season. It's 4 straight unbeaten. It's 2 wins. It's 2 draws. I don't know if they're back-to-back, but this is a Chicago team that is going to be an interesting team to watch. And they go to Orlando next. I think Chicago's a team that you can look at in that game and say they can go on the road and get something out of it.
Particularly with Orlando playing midweek against Charlotte FC as well, and they have to travel back to Orlando after that midweek road trip as well. Listen, this Eastern Conference, though, Jason, so compact, and one of those where you look at the teams that are sitting outside that 9th spot for the play-in game right now: Chicago, Atlanta, Orlando, New England. These are all huge names in terms of teams you expect to be up in that playoff race halfway through the season right now. There's not many teams, even in those playoff spaces, that can feel completely safe right now, because there's a lot to be said about the teams that are outside that margin for playoff positions right now.
No, it feels like you have Cincinnati and Miami gunning it out for Supporter Shield, and you have everybody else that's competitive to varying levels. And it's going to be very, very interesting to watch the rest of the way. I feel like I've said it a lot here lately. You win 2 games in a row, or you do what Chicago's done, and you go 4 straight without a loss, 2 wins, 2 draws in that, you can flip the table around really, really quickly. New England trying to get some momentum as well. Chicago's got it right now. I'll be curious to see where all of it ends up, but let's move on to the next point, because this is a team that is kind of just a fascinating one to watch in 2024 in the Columbus Crew. Now, they've been a little busy in the rumor and transfer market in the last week, with some significant players on the way out potentially. They've added Aziel Jackson from St. Louis City earlier today. But this is a team that went to New York City on Friday night and got a 3-2 win. So often we see teams who lose in a Champions League, Champions Cup final, they have that hangover effect. Columbus bounced back after a really disappointing final performance against Pachuca, and they came back to get a win. And that's a team that, Miami's very good, Cincinnati's very good. Columbus might be the best team, although I do want to see how all the new faces coalesce.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting one because of the fact that game was delayed as well. How often do we see in rain-delayed games the home team being able to come out so much sharper, the road team struggling to adjust, and obviously playing on the unique field that NYCFC was playing on that night as well has an impact. I believe we saw a baseball celebration after one of those goals as well for Columbus Crew, which is always makes me chuckle a little bit, because as a goalkeeper, I think it would be my worst nightmare having corners launched in over the top of my head from the short side that is the corner flag in a baseball game field. But I like Columbus. I love how they play. I love their mentality. It's good to see Cucho back in the starring role that we've seen him in terms of converting the penalty and back in the starting lineup after some difficulties that saw him held out for quite a while earlier on in the season. And I think with Columbus Crew, they do have a good balance. But if there's an area you would be concerned about for them to be successful, it's defensively conceding goals, particularly late in moments where they rely on their forwards to outscore opponents fairly often.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I don't worry about them too much in that regard because of the way that they play. They're going to give up some goals. Now, they can always get better defensively and clean it up, but it's the nature of what they do. They put you under so much pressure because they get so many numbers forward. They'll play 3 center backs, but 2 of them at times will play like holding midfielders and sometimes even higher up the field and create these mismatches. They have to make those moments count. And this is a team that led the league in goals scored last season. And it's a team that is one of the best since the start of 2023 in terms of scoring goals. That part's been okay. And they get it from a lot of different players. In this game, it was 3 different players: Christian Ramirez, Mo Farsi, Cucho Hernandez. I think they're okay with that trade-off of, you know what, we're going to concede maybe a few more than some top teams in air quotes in the league would do, but they have complete and utter confidence on breaking teams with their attacking ability. And typically they pull that off.
Flip the switch to NYCFC, who's been on a really impressive run. Obviously, this snapped a good streak for them. I want to talk about Matt Freese real quick, because Freese has been listed as we get to the MLS All-Star weekend, the selection. A lot of people listing Freese as their top-notch goalkeeper in the league. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think looking at some of those highlights of the goals he conceded, he wasn't in as sharp form as maybe we've seen usually for NYC.
He's been just a little inconsistent since joining NYC last year. I think a lot of people, when that deal went down, and he was blocked in Philadelphia, Andre Blake, one of the best goalkeepers this league's ever seen. Freese was always going to be behind him. So fresh start made sense. I think a lot of people expected he'd walk in the door in New York and be the number 1 guy, and it didn't happen that way. It has this year. And I think he's a young goalkeeper, and you're still going to have some of those moments of inconsistency. and it emerges at times. It's something that needs to change with time. I think all the intangibles, all the ability is there. It's just cleaning up those ups and downs that young goalkeepers sometimes deal with. Let's move on to the next one. New England, mentioned them earlier along with Chicago. New England started really, really badly this season, but they've won 3 in a row. And they beat Vancouver, who has been maybe one of the quieter top teams in the league. New England beat them 3-2 on Saturday. And this group with the Revs and Caleb Porter maybe starting to put it together. You buying in?
It's a tough one because Caleb Porter came into this team and there were high expectations, right? He's a well-known manager. He's experienced in the league, and it just didn't quite sit right. You look at the players that New England has on their roster and you'd never expect to see them as low in the table as they are. It's a good sign with that consistency, like you talked about, with the 3 on the trot for them, that maybe things are turning around, particularly when you have quality players like Carlos Hill on your squad, Verioni starting to step up a little bit perhaps. But my area of concern for New England Revolution, we talked about the compact nature of the table, but still, is it too late halfway through the season to truly expect themselves to turn this around? Because it's going to be consistency far more than 3 on a row that you're going to be looking for if you're going to be able to make up that leeway from the worst starting club history that you found yourself on.
Yeah, I still have some questions. You're seeing Xavier Arriaga get into that group now. I think that helps them a ton. Dylan Borrero coming back, DeJuan Jones coming back from injury. Carlos Heel started to look like Carlos Heel again. I still wonder if they are a little too far back and maybe still a little. I don't think we're ever going to truly understand what happened to them last year. I don't think we're ever going to get that 30 for 30 and that breakdown of how everything fell apart last year with the Bruce Arena era. And I think Caleb Porter had a lot of stuff to deal with. I don't know if he's done dealing with it. I don't know if this team is maybe emotionally past all of that yet. Can they handle adversity is the thing that I want to see. They're at least getting back to looking like themselves, which is a good thing. They're looking a little bit more like a Caleb Porter team should look. Okay, that's a step in the right direction. But if they have a game where, it's just one of those games, and we see it all the time, good teams sometimes just can't find the back of the net. Some teams just, they play well, but they don't get the result. Do they handle that? Because earlier in the year, it felt like they were not handling adversity well at all. Things are good now. If things turn the other way, are you going to see another big slide?
And you talk about things turning the other way. Yes, they're in good form. You talk about 3 wins, but then you look at their next 2 games. Cincinnati away and then Columbus at home. Following that, Atlanta United, who again is a team that has to make up a lot of distance in a short amount of time. That's 3 games in a row where more than likely you're going to face adversity. This may be the period, the stretch where we realize, is New England realistically a team that is ready and capable to turn around this deficit? Or is it going to be one of those seasons that is a roller coaster and they're just trying to tread water and keep their heads above the surface?
Yeah, it's a tough time right now because I think you have a lot of teams in that kind of a situation where, whether it was a slow start, whether it was bad performances, whether you're seeing roster lineup changes and injuries, all the different things. Right now, you've got guys away on international duty. A lot of teams dealing with it, not every team in the same degree. But you're also seeing more teams. I don't know. It feels that way. And maybe just because of what I'm seeing on a regular basis here in Atlanta, it feels like you have a lot more teams in this situation of maybe backs against the wall a little bit earlier than you might think, but not at full strength because of the nature of where we are in the calendar and in the international calendar as well. So it's going to be fascinating. And I mean, the game that Atlanta goes up to New England here coming up, not that far from now, that might end up being a really critical game in the Eastern Conference.
Speaking of critical and Atlanta United, our final point of the 6-pack, drum roll, is going to be Giakoumakis and his transfer that has now been completed to Cruz Azul, a player that Charlotte FC is going to get to see in Leagues Cup, of course, considering we have Charlotte FC, Philadelphia Union, and Cruz Azul all within that group looking to progress in the Leagues Cup. Look, from the outside in, looking at Giakoumakis, obviously had a very successful start to his time and was in that newcomer of the year honors last season for MLS. Just couldn't keep himself fit. Is this good business, Jason, for Atlanta United? Is this the way that the game needs to go, where if a player isn't necessarily contributing, if a player isn't necessarily being able to stay fit, if you get a money offer that's going to help you with salary cap, that's going to help you open up a DP spot, is this the way that the game calls you to move?
Yeah, I think it's necessary business with the way everything worked out. And, you know, we have to talk about these kind of transfers in the big picture sense of it being a three-way deal. You've got the player and you've got the two clubs. And in this case, I think it was pretty clear pretty early that you had the player and Cruz Azul on the same page. A large salary raise, according to reports, a large transfer fee willing to be spent, according to reports. And it's hard for Atlanta to say no in that situation. And then when you just get past that nature of it, it's a big return on the initial investment. It's a big raise for the player. Okay. In most situations, that's probably going to be enough to get the deal done. But you're right. When you get into this situation where this season, especially, injuries have been an issue. And this wasn't a player who had a ton of injury issues before coming to Atlanta. He's struggled to stay healthy. And when you have a designated player and a goal scorer, especially, who can't stay on the field consistently, it will disrupt everything about your team on the field. And I think we've seen that with Atlanta United in 2024. This is a team that is now one goal behind Columbus. We talked about the Crew a little bit ago. The Crew are the leading team in MLS in goals since the beginning of 2023. Atlanta's one goal behind them. But this season, goals per game compared to last season goals per game is dramatically different. What's the difference? The health of Yorgos Giakoumakis. So when everything lines up this way, I think you have to do the deal, and it's a good piece of business. And I think the timing of it, even though it's not ideal because now you have, like we said, big games coming up and you're not going to be at full strength. You're going to be missing a designated player. You're going to be missing a number 9. You can't add anybody until about a month from now. However, it allows you to prepare for the opening of the MLS transfer window. And if you can get everything lined up, maybe have a guy ready to walk in the door day one of that transfer window opening up, and they can get involved quicker with the group. That might end up being helpful. You're going to miss out on some games without a designated player, but you're going to be able to replace that player maybe a little bit quicker than if this lingered and a deal got done later.
And how great of an opportunity is this for Daniel Rios? Obviously, a player I got to see a lot in Charlotte colors, and TRA as well. A great opportunity or a big weight on the shoulders of those two veteran forwards?
I mean, it's both. I think Jamal TRA has been really good in the minutes that he's played this season. Another player who has struggled to stay healthy at times, but a good return on goals for the amount of time he's been able to stay on the field. He's been a handful for opposing defenses, and he leads the line very well in terms of counter pressure. Daniel Rios, I mean, we saw it in the opening goal on the weekend where he doesn't give up on the play multiple times, stays alive, and ends up putting home a rebound after really making the goal out of nothing. It's a 1v1 that Brad Gazan plays long, and Rios with his intelligence. And I think what I've always been impressed with about Daniel Rios is his soccer IQ. So if you are going to play a little bit differently under Rob Valentino, because look, you got to go find results. And if it's going to be maybe less free flowing, maybe less possession based, a little more back and forth, a little more direct at times, you need a crafty player up top who can put in the work, but can also get into those dangerous spots and make goals happen. And I think Daniel Rios absolutely has that kind of potential. You've got some wild cards as well with guys playing either as a false nine. We've seen Thiago Almada do that occasionally, or somebody like Tyler Wolff, who has played as a nine plenty in his careers. He's getting back to full health. But TRA and Rios, they're going to have some time in maybe an extended audition period to impress right now.
Huge rest of the week for Atlanta United. They've got DC United and St. Louis on 2 road trips. So a lot of air miles for you coming up, Jason Longshore, and the busy week ahead in MLS.
I wish it was just that. And then coming back to Atlanta after the game in DC for Copa America with Argentina and Canada. Come on, Argentina gets to play in my hometown. You think I'm going to miss that? Come on.
And we'll be talking about that on 92.9 The Game. So plenty of soccer talk incoming on 92.9 The Game, on Soccer Down Here. Make sure you subscribe to all of the different places that you can find our work. I'm Jessica Charman, Jason Longshore, our first six-pack, MLS six-pack. Jason, it has been a pleasure bringing it through with you.
Always fun. Make sure you recycle those cans in the six-pack, folks.